السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. هو روبرت فيسك الصحفي البريطاني الذائع الصيتي والمعروف بكونه صوتا مستقلا في الشؤون العالمية. هذا العملاق الذي أتقن فن التقاط التفاصيل البشرية وقولبتها والتي أغفلتها عدسات التصوير التلفزيوني يقول الأمور ويصفها كما هي وبأمانة قاسية في كتاباته المشاكسة. أحكامه ولغته صممتا وقدمتا بسخرية مستمرة لتثير الغضب وتستفز. كل ما رسمه وصاغه بكلماته هو صور حية وغير تقليدية ونقدية وأحيانا أدبية لواقع الحروب المريرة. لعله أشهر مراسل أجنبي في بريطانيا بحسب صحيفة نيويورك تايمز، وأكثر المراسلين الأجانب تتويجا في العالم كما اعتبرته وكالة الصحافة النيوزيلندية. أما ذا نيشن فقالت فيه إنه يكتب بتمكن عال عن موضوعاته على غرار المؤرخين. غالبا ما تكون تقاريره حميمية بشكل مؤلم، فهو يأخذ قراءه إلى خضم القصف وإلى معتكف المراسلين وإلى قمرة القيادة في الطائرة وإلى داخل دبابة شديدة الحرارة. بأسلوبه الفريد روبرت فيسك يدعو قراءه إلى إجراء مقابلات مع قادة بارزين مثيرين للجدل من بلفاست إلى بيروت ومن أفغانستان إلى إيران والعراق، حيث لم يكن خائفا في استجوابه لتلك الشخصيات قط. هو مراسل استثنائي ومدرسة في أسلوبه المشوق في جمع الأخبار والتحقق من الوقائع ومزجها وعرضها. روبرت فيسك أحد أعمدة الصحافة الحقيقية. نودعك ونعرب عن تقديرنا لك اليوم من الداخل في هذه الحلقة مع واليس السياسي الإيرلندي الثائر والنائب في البرلمان الأوروبي الذي يطيب لنا أن نستقبله من بروكسل. أهلا بكم، معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. واليس, Irish politician and member of the European Parliament. Welcome to Min الداخل from the inside, Mick.
Thank you.
Pure pleasure to have you always, Mick. Well, Robert Fisk, one of the last great reporters known as the warrior correspondent, a giant in journalism and one of the few honest Western reporters of the war and intrigues imposed on our part of the world, was also designated by the word controversial. His reporting, of course, was always, or it stirred controversy. Why was he considered and often labeled as controversial, Mick?
Well, it's probably safe to say that any reporter from Western Europe who would challenge the general narrative which would have been controlled mostly by the US. If you go out of line and speak to a contrary argument, you can expect to be called controversial, because you've only to look, for example, at the European Parliament today, and you'll see that I would say close to 90% of the members of the European Parliament, and there's over 700 in it, over 90% of them are probably what would be described as Atlanticists, in that they are comfortable with having a strong relationship with the United States, despite all the things that they maybe have done and are doing. And likewise, Robert Fisk told a different story about what was happening in the Middle East. For us in Ireland, for example, I mean, I'm Irish, and his reporting was different than what we normally heard on mainstream media. So I would think that would automatically label him controversial.
He was, as you said, a fearless, independent voice with a deeply researched understanding of the complexities of the region, its history and politics. Observers say that Fisk helped many people understand those fractious divisions, both ancient and modern, of the region. Mick, did you agree with his views, particularly regarding occupied Palestine, Israel, and the Arab world in general?
Yeah, I was a fan of Robert Fisk, and I enjoyed reading his books and his articles. I found him to be an independent voice. He wasn't bullied or intimidated by the mainstream. And he was often on radio stations in Ireland, and he'd be challenged, he would, but he was so knowledgeable about the region because he'd spent so much time there, because he'd studied so much, he was on the ground, and he had first-hand knowledge of what was happening, whereas your average journalist is usually making comments and forming opinions without evidence a lot of the time. Like, for example, in war situations, for example, your average Western journalist gets embedded with the Americans or the British.
Like what happened in Iraq, for example.
Yeah, the majority of the reporting by American journalists and British journalists and Irish, they would have been, they would have got embedded with the occupying forces in the interest of protection for themselves, right? Because they'd have been afraid for their life. But obviously, if they're going to be embedded with one side, it's very hard to tell, to give a balanced view of what's happening. And so, more often than not, the majority of the reporting that came from the Middle East wars, and even when there was no war going on, the majority of reporting lacks balance. It is pro-Western because, number one, a lot of them didn't know any different. Number two, a lot of them set out with an agenda anyway, and they have the papers that they will be working for haven't had an appetite for challenging US imperialism or the European version of it, for that matter.
Right. Fisk was accused by critics of siding with the government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in his reporting on the Syrian war and conflict. Mick, you've been to Syria, to many parts of the conflict-torn country. Actually, we crossed paths there. Remember? Yes.
I remember.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sure. Was Robert's reporting overstated or flawed in terms of the facts on the ground in Syria?
No, I actually found his reporting pretty good on Syria. I don't accept the Western narrative of it. For me, the West like to present the war in Syria. They like to pretend that all the damage was done by Assad and that he was a monster and that he was responsible for the destruction of the country. But there's a different narrative which says that in 2011, when the unrest started, I would say that Assad handled it badly. He handled the protest badly, and he found himself making enemies in his own country, but I'd say they were small in number. But other outside forces, like the US, like the Saudis, and Israel, Turkey, and some of the European countries decided to take advantage of the turmoil in Syria, and they went for regime change. And they armed many jihadist groups that were totally violent. They were not something, if they'd been fighting somewhere else, they'd been on terrorist lists. But because there were, unfortunately, Western governments, including the US and France and the UK and others, as well as the Saudis, and they had the support of the Israelis as well, they literally funded and armed violent groups to destabilize Syria. And that was very much the line that Robert Fisk took in Syria, and I agree with that line. And I mean, there's a huge dilemma in the European Parliament today. We're awful worried about refugees and migrants getting into Europe, right? Now, despite the fact that the Europeans have helped to destroy their communities and their homes, and have forced many of these people to look for a new place to make a living and to try and survive. They don't want migrants and refugees coming into Europe. There's about 4 million refugees and migrants in Turkey, and we're paying them about 3 billion a year to literally cage them to prevent them getting to Europe. But of the 4 million refugees in Turkey today, 3 million of them are from Syria. And if you ask the Europeans, well, what do you want to happen with the refugees in Syria? Now, of the Afghans, and there's a lot of Afghans in Turkey, we'd like to send them back to Afghanistan, despite the fact that it is not a safe place of return, because Afghanistan is in turmoil still. It is anything but safe for someone to go back to.
Sure.
And these people should not be forced back to Afghanistan. But if you ask them about the refugees and the migrants from Syria that are in Turkey, do you want to send them back? Oh no, they don't want to send them back. They don't want them to go back to Syria because they feel it may strengthen the hand of the Syrian government. They don't want them to come to Europe. So what do they want them to do? Do they want to keep them in Turkey forever, in camps?
Right.
They don't. There's a huge contradiction.
That said, Mick, allow me to comment just on this. In one of his dispatches about Syria, Robert said the bodies buried deep within these heaps of concrete, the survivors and those invisibly but forever mentally wounded have paid the price of our military cruelty and indifference. Many of those who fled these gaunt cities are now in Europe or at the bottom of the Mediterranean, and we don't even know or care about the statistics. And this actually takes us to the horrific incidents that have just occurred in EU countries, whether in France and Austria recently. The repercussions of policies that were pursued by the West in Syria have backfired at home. What's your sense, Mick?
Yeah, look, I mean, for me, the terrorist attacks are terrible, and I would condemn 100% the people that do it. But I'm also very conscious of the fact, while I don't excuse the terrorists one iota, because it is senseless what they're doing, and in actual fact, they're doing their own people a disservice. They're giving an opportunity for the right wing in Europe to lambast other migrants and refugees. It's giving them an opportunity to bash Islam, and it gives some of the right wing in Europe to try and make out that all of Islam is terrorists, which is obviously rubbish, and that's not true. And these people that commit terrorist attacks in France or anywhere else, or Belgium or anywhere in Europe, to me, they're not real Islam for me, because that doesn't stack up for me. These are violent people that should be made answer for their crimes. But I mean, we're aware of the fact that since the early 80s, the US and Saudi Arabia, in fact, I think it started in about 78, 79. They started to support and arm the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in order to destabilize what was considered a left-wing government, and then to fight the Russians and the plan was to give Russia their Vietnam in Afghanistan. And as it turned out, it played a part in the fall of the Soviet Union. But the truth remains that the US and Saudi supported and armed a Mujahideen from which a lot of this nonsense and madness has emanated from. I mean, we had the Taliban, and we had that philosophy that we now have with Al-Qaeda that has really began with the Mujahideen. And then, of course, we had the complete destruction of a state in Iraq due to the invasion, the terrible occupation, and the terrible torture in prisons, a whole lot. And you had ISIS developing out of this.
Right.
And as if that wasn't bad enough, we've also seen then we've had the jihadist groups then in Syria being armed by the West. I mean, in all fairness, where did I think it was all going to end? I mean, the West has helped to destabilize this region to a terrible degree.
Right.
But it does. The fact still remains. I mean, I'm still not going to make any excuse for the people that are committing terrorist attacks anywhere, whether it's in the Middle East or whether it's in Europe.
Sure.
I will always condemn violence, whether it's by mad groups like these or whether it's by state organizations, governments, or whatever they are.
Of course, we do underscore this stance also. Mick, allow us to stop for a short break, and then afterwards we're going to continue and talk further about this particular subject, but after the break. إن فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا. أهلا بكم من جديد. Mick Wallace, Irish politician and member of the European Parliament. Welcome back, Mick. Well, hello. French President Emmanuel Macron said, quote, "This is our Europe." He described the murder of 3 people in Nice as, quote, "an Islamist terrorist attack." There is not only a spike of corona today sweeping across Europe, but also a surge of Islamophobia. Terrorism, Mick, is terrorism. We all agree on that. After all, does it have to be associated with a religion or race? What is meant by the president's comment that Europe is our Europe?
Yeah, but I mean, listen, you asked me about his comment, Europe is ours, right? I mean, he also needs to have a more open mind, right? And you will find that while he has been tolerant of and accused and guilty himself of being disrespectful to Islam because of terrorists who have behaved badly, that doesn't give him a right to be disrespectful to a religion. I mean, I would give out about the behavior of the Israeli government, the behavior of the Israeli Defense Forces in their treatment of the Palestinians and others. But it doesn't mean that I'm anti-Jewish, because I'm not, because I don't attack the Jewish people, but I will attack the behavior of the Israeli government and the Israeli Defense Forces.
Sure.
And you will find in France that if you were to be abusive towards Judaism, you would be attacked, and rightly so. But the same goes, they should be respectful to all religions.
To all religions, true.
Whether it's Jews or Islam or Christian or whatever it is, Hindu, we have to show respect to all religions.
Sure. Now, by late January next year, the US is very likely to be paralyzed in an intractable, possibly violent constitutional crisis and in all-out tech war with China. By then, Europe and America are likely to be in full recession as coronavirus fires up for the winter as expected to be. One cannot help but notice that European politics at the national level is all domestic, like school openings, virus restrictions, and shrinking economies, whilst far away, Brussels fantasizes about building a stronger, more autonomous European empire. Are the Europeans, Mick, going to identify themselves as an empire, or would they rather stay as a vassalage to the US?
There's forces at play in Europe and have been for a long time, looking to militarize Europe, looking to become a powerful unit that could challenge anybody else, including the US or China or Russia. And we have seen a gradual increase in defence spending. We've seen them change the rules. Only in Ireland this month, and you probably don't even know about it, but the finance bill is being debated in the Parliament in Ireland at the moment. And they've just introduced a measure which says that any Irish company selling products to NATO or to any firm involved in European security and defence policy missions, they'll be VAT free. In other words, the state will not collect value-added tax on the sale of those products. This is absolute madness. We're looking at taxing. People who lost their jobs because of COVID are having to pay tax now on the payments that they were receiving to keep them alive while their jobs were closed down. And yet, we're saying now that products sold to NATO or to European security and defence policy missions, people operating on them, that these will be tax-free. I mean, it's absolute madness. But your question about the unity of Europe, right? You have people wanting to bring all Europe together to be a powerful empire, to be a powerful military force. But there's also a lot of unrest about that among the people of Europe. And member states, when the COVID broke out first, Italy was the first country to be badly hit. Italy contacted all the other member states and asked for help, immediate help, because they were unprepared. Not one country came to their aid. They were getting aid from Cuba and China before they got it from the European Union.
Sure.
Now, at a later stage, then Europe helped, and they boasted. It was a reaction. And I mean, I was very critical of the Europeans that they didn't come to Italy's help when Italy asked for their help. And the people of Italy, and I spent a fair bit of time in Italy, were really upset at the lack of solidarity that was there when push came to shove.
Right.
But obviously the help came later, and when the EU passed 750 billion, which is a mixture of loans and grants, it turned out that Italy got the lion's share of it. But the reason they got it, not just because they needed it, but because Europe was afraid of their life that Italy would leave the European Union.
Right.
And that threat remains. And if Italy leaves the European Union, it'll actually be a bigger thing even than Britain leaving. So they are obviously worried about that. And I've never heard so much talk about solidarity and European solidarity since then. But a lot of it is propaganda, and they're worried.
So bottom line, Mick, no Europe empire.
We are not in favour of a European army. We are not in favour of militarising Europe. We want peace, not war.
Right. Excellent. All right, Mick Wallace, Irish politician and member of the European Parliament. Thank you very much, Mick, for this precious participation from Brussels and for your piercing insights.
Thank you, no bother.
Always a pleasure to have you. Bless you and be safe. والشكر لكم مشاهدينا الكرام على طيب المتابعة. للتفاعل أكثر تابعونا على صفحات السوشيال ميديا من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.